Welcome to another lesson in Introduction to the Middle East. Today we're going to talk about Muhammad and the founding of Islam. And to introduce today's lesson, I would like to show you a short video clip that kind of gives a backdrop of Muhammad's world as he was growing up and before he received his revelations. I think it's very insightful.
In Cairo, a muezzin calls faithful Muslims to prayer. It's the same call that sounds 5 times a day, every day, in cities across the world. Nearly a quarter of the people on earth respond to it, bound together by the enduring spirit of Islam. God is most great, the muezzin calls. I testify there is no other God but God. I testify Muhammad is the messenger of God. Come and pray. Come and flourish. God is most great. There is no God but God. In the unfolding of history, Islamic civilization has been one of humanity's grandest achievements. A worldwide power founded simply on faith. A spiritual revolution that would shape the nations of 3 continents and launch an empire. For the West, much of the history of Islam has been obscured behind a veil of fear and misunderstanding. Yet Islam's hidden history is deeply and surprisingly interwoven with Western civilization. It was Muslim scholars who reclaimed the ancient wisdom of the Greeks, while Europe languished in the Dark Ages. It was they who sowed the seeds of the Renaissance, 600 years before the birth of Leonardo da Vinci. From the way we heal the sick, to the numerals we use for counting, cultures across the globe have been shaped by Islamic civilization. But all this began with the life of a single, ordinary man, and the profound message he proclaimed would change the world forever. His name was Muhammad.
Now, according to John Esposito, in Islam, the Straight Path, he said that Arabia has 1 million square miles. You can see the size of it by putting it against the United States. That's nearly 1/3 of the US or even Europe. And the Arabian Peninsula was dominated by desert and steppe areas. Bedouin tribe had a pastoral nomadic lifestyle, traveling from one place to another, searching for water and pasture for their flocks and sheep and their camels. And 2 of the major centers, gathering places, or cities, was Mecca and Medina. And these will play an important part in Muhammad's life. Mecca was the center of trade and commerce, and Yathrib, or Medina, it was an important agricultural settlement. It's a place where Muhammad will live after he flees for his life to leave Mecca. And the Bedouins will earn a living here in Medina by herding and agriculture, and by trade and by raiding. And there was a long-established tradition of fighting between the different tribes throughout the peninsula. For example, and they had different rules and regulations, this kind of unwritten order of things that you did when you fought each other. For example, you could capture livestock from your enemy, but you had to do it with the minimal amount of casualties. And raiding was illegal during the pilgrimage. And yes, they had pilgrimages to Mecca before Islam came along, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's important too that whether the people were in Arabia, whether the peoples of Arabia lived in town or in the desert, there was an organization and identity rooted in the extended family. And these related families that came together, they were called a clan. And several families, a cluster of clans, constituted a tribe. And the tribe was led by a sheikh and elected the chief by the heads of all the leading clans. Muhammad belonged to the Banu Hashim. Banu means sons of Hashim. And that was his clan, and it was a lesser clan of the powerful Quraysh tribe that dominated Mecca. Now, if you look there where the arrow is, you can see where the Quraysh tribe lived. And I'll zoom in a little bit right there. And there were two different clans within the Quraysh that had a little bit of a rivalry, and that was the Umayyad clan and the Hashemite. And they will vie for leadership later on, as we'll see as we talk more about them. Now, according to Esposito, the people of the Arabian Peninsula had an ethical code that some term as tribal humanism. And it was epitomized by virtue and manliness, bravery, loyalty to family, hospitality, patience, persistence, preservation of tribal and family honor. And it's important to understand that tribal humanism tended toward egalitarianism, meaning they believed in a broader equality and sharing material goods and power within a tribe. I kind of see it as the Na'vi tribe on Pandora in the movie Avatar. Now, in contrast, trade-based societies, like what Mecca had become by the time Muhammad had grown up, these trade-based societies were more exclusive and restrictive about who received the material goods and the power within the tribe. And they exercised power derived from wealth through the control of trade. Mecca, in part, kind of became like the capital by Muhammad's day. And people like Muhammad, who was an orphan, would live a life sometimes like District 13. And consequently, said David Peck, the significant social political changes through increased trade led to the formation of a wealth-based social and political elite by the time Muhammad was born. It was the Quraysh tribe that dominated trade. And they were in Mecca, and they were controlling Mecca. It was a powerful place where people would come from all the surrounding Middle East countries to come and to make a pilgrimage to the Kaaba, where these idols were. And these social and political changes led to class divisions between rich and poor, between strong and weak in Mecca during Muhammad's youth, marginalizing the unprotected and weaker members of society, such as widows and orphans, while empowering wealthier Meccans. Now, I share this with you because this aspect of Mecca will bother Muhammad, and it will influence his social vision later when he moves to Medina and he becomes the leader of his people. He will ensure that this doesn't happen in Medina and that there's more equality among the people and they are more like the planet Pandora. Now, there was another aspect of Muhammad that bothered him as well and influenced him spiritually, and that is that the Meccans, though they had a form of worship through polytheism, they worshipped idols, and these idols gave little meaning or purpose to their life, at least in the sense that we see the purpose of life, like there was no resurrection, no divine judgment, no eternal punishment, no reward. Now, before Islam, Arabians worshipped many gods and goddesses. They thought that these gods would protect them in their individual tribes. The main god was Allah, which is the god of Islam today. And he had daughters, Al-Lat, Manat, Al-Uzza. And the people associated these gods and goddesses. Now, there were many of them. In fact, in the Kaaba during Muhammad's childhood, there were 360 idols in the Kaaba that people would come to worship. And they would associate these gods and goddesses with sacred objects like trees, stone, springs, wells, and the people feared them more than they respected and loved these deities. So they really worshiped their god out of fear more than they did love. Now Allah, again, was the supreme high God, the creator and the sustainer of life. And this is an artist's depiction of what the daughters of Allah look like. Now this is a fun little drawing I found of Mecca. You can see the Kaaba, the cube in the middle there. If that's what Kaaba means in Arabic, just means cube. And it was the central shrine of all the gods. It was kind of similar to Mars Hill in Athens, Greece, where Paul went on his mission. The Kaaba, according to tradition, had been built by Abraham and his son Ishmael, and the shrine had originally been dedicated to the worship of Abraham's one supreme God, a monotheistic deity called El. Now, by Muhammad's time, the Kaaba had lost its original character as a monotheistic shrine dedicated to El. And by the way, El is the same root as you see that in the Hebrew, the Elohim. And instead became a major pilgrimage destination for polytheistic worship. The term monotheism means the worship of one supreme God. Polytheism means the worship of many gods. I want to show you a short clip there. Amira Benison and Karen Armstrong will offer some more insights into Mecca's polytheism.
This was a society that had its structures, a belief system, but not as we would understand an organized religion today.
The peoples of Arabia were polytheistic. They venerated a number of different gods. In general, each tribe had their own patron god. And that was the case throughout Arabia.
And Mecca, Muhammad's birthplace, is believed to have been the most important center of this polytheistic worship.
There was a long-established Arabian paganism, as we'd call it today, that took virtually the same form in most of the cities and settled regions. There would be a sort of square shrine in the middle, circumambulation around it, and various gods. There was Allah, the high god, and there were goddesses. But most of the Arabs were not particularly religious in that sense. This was something more for the settled areas, the towns, the agricultural settlements.
Orthodox Muslims believe the Kaaba was built by God in the time of Adam, but there is no archaeological or historical evidence to confirm its exact origins. By the time of Muhammad's birth, it had long been a shrine drawing people to the town of Mecca, the center of pagan cults for the peoples of Arabia. There are no non-Muslim sources which connect Abraham to Mecca, but by Muhammad's birth, the Kaaba contained the idols of over 360 different gods, each one venerated in its own right. There was a special time of truce declared every year when all the hostile tribes could come to Mecca to circle the Kaaba and worship their gods without fear of conflict. This regular pilgrimage brought many people to Mecca, and that meant trade and wealth. The tribe Muhammad was born into, the Quraysh, controlled the running of the Kaaba, and so were rich and powerful, although Muhammad's immediate family were not part of the ruling elite.
Now, although it's common to speak of Islam's origins in 7th century Arabia, such a notion is historically inaccurate and, from a Muslim perspective, theologically false. Islam was not an isolated, totally new monotheistic religion. The monotheistic message of the Quran and the preaching of Muhammad did not occur in a vacuum. Monotheism had been flourishing in Semitic and Persian cultures for centuries, preceding Muhammad's ministry. So point that out to say that Muhammad did not introduce monotheism. It was already around. It wasn't in Mecca, but certainly it was other places. In fact, for example, there were Jews who worshiped Jehovah in Jewish communities like Tema and Medina, and also in Khaybar. And there were Christians too who believed in monotheism. And also, although some Christians were settled in Mecca, most of them were on the periphery of central Arabia, the Hijaz, along the caravan routes. And of course, there were the Zoroastrians from Iran, and they would come down and trade and come into Arabia as well. So their influence was there. There's also this group called the Hanifs. And apparently, according to the Quran, Surah just means chapter 3, verse 95, talks about the Hanifs and mentions them. Now, I share all this. This is kind of an introductory before we can talk about Muhammad, because just as the injustice and inequity in Mecca influenced Muhammad's vision for social change, so did the decadence and the ills of his society. And because of this, and in part because of his reflective nature, he would often retreat to a cave on Mount Hira, a few miles north of Mecca. And it was here that Muhammad, the orphan boy, would become Muhammad, the messenger of God.